People are usually hungover on Mondays, right?
Yeah, that's how it works.
You go to church a couple of times on Sunday, you go home, slug a bottle of gin because you have to go to work the next day. Is that what happens?
Actually, I drink the gin in church.
You sneak it in with you.
The body of Christ, the blood of Christ, the liquid of the gods. I think that's how it goes.
Is gin the liquid of the gods?
Well, they're always wearing those like herbal rings around their head, little wreaths.
Oh,
That's what they use to make gin out of. That's
it's
what
a
I've
little
heard, at least.
juniper. Yeah. Okay, this makes so much more sense now.
Good.
Yeah, I actually was listening to a podcast the other day that was talking about psychedelics in ancient like Greek rituals. Like they go and they'll find these amphoras or vases or whatever, and now they're doing all the weird testing on them to figure out what exactly was in these drinks that would make people see the gods or have religious experiences. And of course, they're finding all sorts of weird compounds that are like psychotropic in there. So it is funny to think that like classic religions really did have like you'd go do a pilgrimage once every couple of years, and you would just go take shrooms basically and hallucinate.
I like it. Now, but what the heck is a amphora? Some obscure sort of
it's like a
pottery or something
with some extra letters. No, yeah, it's just a vase,
a vase.
A vase. I think it's there's a special shape to it that it has a long neck and then it swells on the sides and has double handles.
Oh, okay.
So yeah.
When I think of like old vases, that's kind of like the one I think of.
Yeah. This you're thinking of an amphora. You know, I'm glad I could be here to enlighten you on this Monday.
How amphibious of you. Wait.
Right.
That's not. Is that not that word?
Pretty much the same thing. That's where the shape comes from. Is the sucker pads on a gecko's foot? No,
yes,
I don't know.
I like it. Bioengineering.
Right? Why not?
You heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, everybody. It is Monday, November 15th, 2021.
Man. November is already halfway done.
Yes, which means the year is 11.5 the way done. 11.5 out of 12.
That's a
good fraction.
Yeah. There we go. But don't we have to go to 13?
That's a baker's dozen. That only happens every seventh year.
Okay.
Man, does it?
It just feels like the years. I don't know. It feels like the last couple of weeks has sped by. It's like I just turned a corner and it was November, and then it's gonna be holidays, and yeah, it's all rushing up pretty quick.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's a good time to tell you. No time better than the present for an intervention. These past few weeks, this is what you've been the whole time. So that's why it went so fast for you.
Yeah.
You just,
I know. Time flies when you're what?
Zombie.
A zombie?
Yeah.
After you've been bitten.
Yeah. Well, how's your weekend?
Oh, it was pretty good. Went to a birthday party for a friend that was really great. He's been going through some rehab stuff, so it was cool to see him up and about. And then we also just yesterday, Sue-Ann went autocross racing, so she races cars and went out and placed in the novice class, and that's kind of the end of the season for autocross. Like they don't start up again till February, so she's got all these projects to work on her cars to get them all up in tip-top shape.
Any idea what the cross comes from? I mean, there's autocross, there's motocross. Was there horse cross at one point? Hot cross buns. I don't know what all was involved.
Yeah, crisscross applesauce.
Yes, crisscross the rappers.
Jump around.
Yes.
Oh, wait, no, that was House of Pain. Never mind.
But I liked it. It was quick. Jump.
Jump. That was it. Okay.
Crisscross and make you.
Jump. Yeah. I think you have to put your clothes on inside out. Do you remember all that?
Oh, I don't, but I'm seeing it in the music video now.
That they did. Yeah. It was really cool to wear inside out overalls for a while.
Yes, and then overalls keep coming in and out of style.
Yeah, it's like the world just can't let them go. It's like they get bored of normal clothes. They're like, I'm going to wear these instead.
They're so utilitarian. I mean, you got so much good use out of them.
Yeah, and I think the female version that I've seen a lot of lately is jumpers.
You know, I just thought about it now, but frockets, which many tout as an innovation and fashion, that was around with overalls.
I know. All these things were already there.
Yes.
Yeah, you're just calling it a different name.
Yeah.
No. 200 years ago, they had invented this. I do like the overalls for big guys, though. You
Oh
just
yeah.
get to avoid the belt. It's got the suspenders built into it. Like I think it's a nice thing.
Yeah. I do, but okay. Back to the original question. Any idea
Sorry.
where the cross comes from in motocross?
No. Do you know?
No, I don't.
I was just riffing there. I have
No,
no idea
that's
at
a good
all.
riff. This is a good riff.
Yeah. No, none at all. We have to look that up now.
Yeah, I guess we
Dang
will.
it.
Darn. No, darn.
Oh shucks.
Oh man, so yeah, you had a good weekend. How's your shop coming along? I don't know if it's been a while since we had an
Shop
update.
is great. I had 2 guys come over on Friday and help me out
That-
moving
that's
stuff.
not why I asked, but
Yeah,
good.
Yeah, but yeah. Anyway, Reed and a friend came over on Friday and helped me move a bunch of stuff from the garage into the shop, and then I started framing out the back wall, which has it's kind of interesting because you can do in these metal buildings. There's what's called purloins, which are your cross braces, and you could choose to just put the framing on top of them. But I don't know, for some reason I can't give up the 3.5 inches of space that would eat into the shop. So I'm framing inside the metal pieces so the walls will be a little more flush. And it's taking about 3 times longer than it should.
Nice.
But and also nothing is quite square or level. So, one cut is 31 and an eighth, and the next is 31 and 3/8. And, it's just it's nitpicky. But it was actually kind of a good time. I got the office set up. The office is working. I got the internet quasi set up. It's functional. And that's something I'm probably going to have to talk to Reed a little more about.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's funny though. The you're mentioning how nothing's sized right, nothing's leveled right, and I don't know. Of course, I can't think that it's kind of like life, right? You have all these best laid plans, you have all the ways things should be, and then they all slightly deviate. And even in the areas that you would not expect them to, like, oh, this is a commercially built apartment building. Everything should be level. Everything should be flat. Everything should be down to the inches that they give me on my floor plan. Like, they're professionals. This was built in the last 5 years. Come on. And then you start doing it, and you start hanging curtains like we did. Not Friday, but the Friday before, which was whatever date that was, 14 plus 3,
It was like the
October,
end of
late.
October.
Yeah. But yeah, you're talking about exactly that, how you go to hang your curtains and then you're like, oh, I'm going to use the ceiling as a reference so I can make sure it's level. And it's like, no, that's not level. So
Yeah, not going to work.
I feel the pain. I feel the pain on that one.
Yeah, and I remember doing yours, and it was about 1/4 of an inch off, just across an 8-foot span. And you just go, but it all looks level. So
Yeah.
Anyway, it's just little nitpicky things, and not that at the end of the day this is a shop. No one is going to care. I'm the only one that cares. But a lot of it for me is structural load. I want each 2x4 that's inside of these cross braces. I don't want the cross braces to take the weight down. Because they're built to stabilize horizontally. So I want the downward weight to actually be moving through the wood. So it needs to fit very tight in there. I don't want a lot of flex or give in there. So I'm getting really fussy about it because I feel like it's the right thing to do. I don't honestly know. I'm making this up on the fly.
Yeah, the best kind of structural engineering is the one done by the guy in his shop in the back of the country.
Yeah, right.
And
who has 0 experience.
yeah, no, I think I have a lab coat. I've got some videos, so I need to get you to wear that and do some maniacal laughter, especially since you have that lovely mustache going on right now.
Yeah, if I get the hair really kicking out, we could do like, it could be
that's
good.
kind of how I woke up this morning. I was like, the downside of curly hair is, you wake up and it just
it just does whatever the heck it wants. Yeah.
And for those of you who are not on video, I'm so sorry, but you've got to see Ryder's lovely mustache action going on here. I don't know. The closest thing I could think of was, it's kind of like Colonel Sanders, but not. I don't know. Who are your inspirations?
Oh yeah, no. I was. Have you ever watched the show Winona?
No.
Or okay, how about any show with Wyatt Earp in it?
No, I don't even recognize the name.
What?
Mm-mm.
No, Tombstone.
That sounds familiar.
Okay. So Val Kilmer, he's in Tombstone. He's got something like this rock.
Okay.
So yeah, I was thinking of Wild West Cowboy, but of course on the party I went to on Saturday night, everyone just kept saying, "Oh, you're back in porn."
Classic. Yeah, the good old porn stash.
Yeah. When in doubt, of course, if you trim it off a little bit differently, then everyone's like makes fun of you for being a cop or a pedophile. So it's like, porn versus pedophile. I'm going with like the the country stash.
Yeah, I like it. Well, now all you need is if you have a piece of straw in your teeth, you just kind of walk
Just
around with it.
yeah.
Then it'll make it clear. I'm not in porn.
Not in porn.
I'm in production
Yeah.
of farming stuff.
Farming, yes. Farming production, not porn production.
Yes,
Once
and
again.
if you wear those overalls like we were talking about,
that's what it
that's
is.
what they're for.
I'm not carrying around my gun, which you can now do in Texas legally. I need to wear the overalls, straw hanging out of the mouth, strapped with like an old Colt.
Okay, just to
Yeah.
be clear, you can just now carry your guns.
Oh no, you could do it previously. It's just in
okay.
the last few months. I went into Chipotle the other day, and there's like 4 guys in there open carry, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. Okay,
Yeah,
that's where we're at now.
yeah. I don't know. Yeah,
Yeah, whatever. That's a whole subject in itself.
Yeah, good save.
Yeah.
Well, with that, let's welcome everybody to the show. This is What the Hell is Water. I'm Reed Garcia,
Ryder Richards.
and here is a quick intro for you guys.
Helpful for life.
And we're back.
Wow, we have such lame sounds this morning. Y'all, Reed needs to get like an adrenalized shot here. We're gonna have to.
This just in. Excitement and energy.
What the hell is water?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so what the hell is water? So this weekend we had the last of our Rome Book Club for the next couple of weeks. And for those who have not heard us talk about that before, it is a book club in the sense that a bunch of people are reading a book together and discussing it. But we're using something called Rome Research, which is a digital note-taking software that we both use personally. I also use professionally with my company. And we joined this book club. Was this the first one you did, or did you do the last one?
I did the last one as well.
Okay, so I don't know, 6 months ago, something like that, 4 months ago, somewhere in there, we've now done 2 sets of book clubs with them, and this last book club was even more interesting because it was actually reading 2 books at the same time, doing something called syntopical reading, which was a technique that we actually learned in the previous book club, which is a fancy way of saying, so using those stems I was talking about earlier the other day, syn means together, S-Y-N, syn, that's fine.
Synthesis.
Synthesis, and then topical, like topic, so basically kind of together topics. So having the 2 books that we're reading together, our goal was, hey, have some questions you're trying to answer, kind of like you would in scientific research or something like that, and then use various books, various resources to help answer that question. Mm-hmm. And so I thought it would be a good little segment for us to do over the next couple weeks to kind of give a little bit of recap of the things that we've talked about within that. And so today we'll keep it pretty brief for today, and we'll just kind of introduce it. But the 2 books that we were reading were called So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport, and the other one was called Range by David Epstein. And real quickly, I guess, what's your takeaways from So Good They Can't Ignore You?
Yeah, so the books have different structures. That's one of the things you learn about with this kind of inspectional reading, right? Is to sort of look at them overall. And So Good They Can't Ignore You is broken down into these little sort of bite-sized chunks and segments, and you can kind of go through it. And he actually does like recaps at the end to give you little lessons. But a lot of it is about workplace and career-driven kind of things. Like one of the things that he talks about is actually finding something and becoming, once again, like the title says, so good that they can't ignore you, which is sort of a line that he picked up from Steve Martin. One of the ways to become an expert at something is just to spend, 5 years toiling away on it until you get really good at it. And he sort of brings up the point that once you get really good at it, you can actually sort of you're on the edge or a frontier of your industry. And at that point, you can start seeing things that other people don't really see, and you can start planning that as your mission to move into the future with. He talks about having a craftsman mindset, and that craftsman mindset is very important for honing in on things and really digging deep into them. Not just sort of going in and blowing things off or just putting in the hours by rote, but actually honing in and becoming masterful at what you're doing.
Yeah, and the the opposite of that craftsman mindset. I'm failing to remember that term. Do you happen to remember it off the top of my?
No, I
Okay,
don't.
but the one of the phrases and one of the ways that I kind of thought of it was the craftsman is like very much like, all right, put your head down. You're going to do the work. You're going to make stuff happen. Very much internalizing it versus I'm going to let stuff happen to me or help. One way somebody in the book club phrased it was so good they can't ignore you is about people who are looking for people to actually. I'm gonna drop that one because I'm gonna mess up the the analogy.
Yeah.
All right, but so good they can't ignore you was kind of a little bit about, hey, go into a thing and do it very well, and then use that as your strength. And that as your marketing to help do more within your career, do more within your life.
Right. And both books are actually fans of this idea that once you do get into a certain level of depth and you figure out what's going on there, be willing to take that information, whatever it is, and pivot. And pivot to a new job, a new career, into your life. But it's one part of it is, of course, taking the lessons you learn from digging deep, or the idea is that those are somehow more profound lessons that you can only learn by going deep. So you can't stay broad all the time. You do actually have to dig deep on some things. So they would call somebody who never digs deep, maybe you just you're kind of a shallow generalist. But there are people who dig deep and get these lessons, and they sort of can then move them through other facets of their life. So that's great. But also you can use them to jump into other careers and other jobs. And if you can basically get beyond sort of, if you want to bring up like an 80-20 rule, if you can get beyond that sort of 80%, then you can pivot to an alternate career. This is one of the things Range talks about a little bit more than So Good They Can't Ignore You. But both of them talk about sort of being willing to jump into multiple projects or multiple facets. But once you've drilled deep on one, spend a little time working in that realm, and then jump to another realm and drill deep again on that.
Yeah. Okay, so that's a pretty good touch on what So Good They Can't Ignore You is. What about Range by David Epstein? What would your brief summary or takeaways of that one be?
Yeah, same kind of things. And I feel like there's a small difference in that Epstein seems to be a much bigger fan of you having of. I think that's where I'm kind of conflating the two books a little bit. Is he's really taking this idea of taking multiple careers and pivoting off of them, so constantly pivoting. And he was actually in our book club. He actually showed up and talked a little bit about it. But the idea that he talked about is sort of meandering through jobs. It looks like meandering, but what's actually happening is you're jumping into a job, you learn things in it, you find an interest point, and then you dig into that interest point, which might lead you to a different job. So that's a pivot inside a career rather than just randomly choosing different jobs. So he also talks about things like mentorship, having somebody else that can help guide you. But he talks about his own career, which is going from something like science or biology and being a journalist in that capacity to something like sports. And so he brought biology into sports. And by being a biology guy in sports, he's an all-star. But in simply the biology field, he wasn't ever going to really be a great biology journalist. But you take one aspect that you're good at and you bring it into a different field, and all of a sudden you're a superstar because no one else is doing that. So he's a big fan of kind of jumping and carrying your old skill sets with you and really making some sort of new frontiers along the way. And he gives lots of examples in his book, lots and lots of examples of people who have done this. And it was one of the things that, overall, the way that I heard both books described is kind of along this Malcolm Gladwell type writing, where you have a premise and then you go find stories that match your premise. And you end up having a ton of these sort of stories of people who have been successful following this path that you're laying out.
Yeah, which brings up a good point. That was one of the big things for us as members of the book club that we had to be aware of, because guess what? We also were kind of in a self-selecting group that this message played very well into. The Rome Book Club is comprised of largely a bunch of people who are very curious by nature and they like to explore a whole bunch of different things. And although, if you talk to and look at some of the people in the group, you might think of them as specialists. It seemed like most people within that seemed to identify with being a generalist. And so there was some discussion about what is a generalist versus specialist, which we can get some more into that topic another day. But it was interesting to to hear how people resonated with it, and it's like, oh, kind of like our friend Alexandra said, I found myself like, hey, the more and more I agree with this thing, the more and more I need to put up my questioning thing and be like, hey, is this really true, or is this just someone putting together a good narrative with the story that's out there?
Yeah, no, this is an excellent point that, of course, we need to be aware of. But at the same point, you don't want to let it also ruin the magic of the book, right?
Right.
You can actually just sort of sandbox these things and have both ideas running simultaneously. One of the examples of this kind of thing, so I did bring up Malcolm Gladwell, but apparently David Epstein, a big portion of why he wrote the book was to push back against Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule, which is that the idea that with 10,000 hours of deliberate practice in a specialized niche field, then you can actually achieve some level of mastery. Because then when David Epstein started looking at it, he was like, hang on a second, let's do the math on this. And there's some people that achieve mastery within, let's say, 3,000 hours, and some that spend 30,000 hours and they're still not achieving it. And how are you framing deliberate practice? And then it starts getting into this thing where he actually talked about it being self-affirming, in that you don't know if you're doing deliberate practice until you become a master of it, and then that meant the whole time you were doing deliberate practice because otherwise you can't define it. You must not be practicing right unless you achieve this magical thing, and then you were doing it right the whole time. And so he's really pushing back on some of these kind of conceptions that we all just latched onto immediately because it sounded so great.
Right, and it made logical sense, right?
Yeah.
And again, maybe that's also part of falling victim to what we were just talking about, which the term for that is confirmation bias, which is where you're basically looking for evidence, looking for things to confirm the things that you already believe. So yeah, it was a really interesting book club going through that and seeing how different people responded to the book and seeing which stories resonated differently with people. And there are some stories about space in there, which I naturally enjoyed, which is interesting because if you'd asked me like before I got into the working world, like, do I have a big affinity for space? I would have said no. It's not like, that was actually one of the things that as I went into these companies, you see a bunch of people who are, just hooked on space. It's like a drug to them. Like they really find it amazing and fascinating, and it's so cool to watch that through them. But it's like I just don't share that same passion. Just like I didn't share the same passion for planes. You work for Boeing, and the next thing you know, someone's like, "Oh yeah, I saw the 737-742, and that one launched yesterday." And that's not how you say planes, but that's kind of part of it.
No, I went out there with my camera, and we just stood outside the tarmac taking pictures.
Exactly. And I'm like, which one's that? Is that the bigger one or the smaller one, or is that the newer one? And it's like, some people may roll their eyes, and other people be like, I get it. But the thing is we'll talk about this more another day too. But the way vehicle manufacturers make model numbers is just asinine. It just does not make sense. It's not intuitive. And even today, the car manufacturer of the future, Tesla. Let's look at theirs. Model 3, Model M, Model S, Model X. You're all over the place.
Yeah, I know, right? Well,
what does this have to do with anything?
Yeah, I also love how like they had to throw the X in there, right? Because X is a cool letter.
Yeah, so
and it's
cool.
just like, well, now you're all out of like, it would be nice if they started with A and just worked forward, right?
Or I don't know, maybe just be like, oh, the Tesla SUV. Oh,
wait, you mean name it what it
is? That's not cool enough.
Yeah,
that's not cool enough.
SUX, the Tesla SUX.
So one thing I wanted to bring up here, as we were talking about, so we were talking, for those of you just joining us, we were just giving a brief recap. Some of the things we took away from two books that we recently read: Range by David Epstein and So Good They Can't Ignore You by Cal Newport. And one of the things that they talk about is kind of this conversation of how deep do you go on one topic, how specialized you get versus going across a range of things and not going that deep into any one of them. And so one of the things that they talked about here, which I'll put on our screen here if it get it to show up. One second. Is the different letters, using letters as I guess analogies for how deep you go into something. And one of the ones was an I. It was an I, which I and it's just to show you, it goes, pretty much straight down vertically. If you,
yes.
One way I think of it is, think about this as if you have ground and you're digging down into the ground.
Yes.
This is.
So when we talk about drilling deep in a subject, yes.
Right. So here's your lovely ground. Look at that. Oh,
Oh wow! Look at that
man.
ground.
Oh, and there's even a layer of grass on
That's some
top.
sediment
Yeah,
and
man.
man, is there oil under there? Reed?
Yeah. So
What?
there's the eye, which is I just undid all the stuff I did, but we'll just pretend that was still there. New program I'm still learning. The other one was a T.
Hey,
Which, look at that. There's a T. So you can see kind of go broad at the top across a wide variety of things, and then go deep in one type of thing. And then another one still was an M, which is, okay, you have that breadth at the top, but then you dive deep into a couple of different areas. One, I'm curious, which of these do you kind of resonate most with? And then also, any thoughts on the metaphor?
yeah, I think I'm just like a flat line, like a dash. That's me. Just there is no
Just like at
depth
parties,
all.
when people are saying like, "Oh man, Ryder's really on it. He's killing it." No, he's just
I'm asleep. I'm just like, as we talked about earlier, just
yeah, exactly.
zombie. No, there is also kind of a pie reference in there between the T and the M, which is kind of fun to
Nice.
throw in.
Because the pi symbol is kind of like that.
Yeah. So it's like you get to drill deep
branches.
with a mountain. I don't know. Like
And if you
Smoke
have it
Valley.
like the squiggly line, it's kind of fun, like,
it's like,
"Ooh,
hey.
hey, I go deep, but I'm interesting too."
I'm a pie guy. Yeah. No, I really do like the sort of language metaphor there. I would think that I don't honestly know where I stand on any of these topics. I feel like I'm a permanent amateur in almost every field. So it's almost like if you go into something like, I would pretend maybe I'm an M, but I would be a really squatty M because I probably have not gone deep enough on anything. I would assume I've gone deep enough on art. So maybe I'm an M with just like a really long middle line.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I was just thinking of the new acronym that we could come up with for this class of people just like you, the permanent amateurs. There's the people out there who on the internet, they're like, oh, they're yelling, complaining about all their stuff, and people call them Karens, right? And it's like, oh, you're being such a Karen. Well,
Yeah.
now today, you heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen. You're a Pam, a permanent amateur.
A permanent am.
Yeah.
Pan am.
Yeah, but is
Am.
there anything wrong with being a Pam? I think it was
Oh.
in So Good They Can't Ignore You. He started to describe what an amateur was, and it's like, amateur didn't start out as some sort of like insult. It was written as, hey, this is someone who's taken an interest in a thing, and now they're like trying to learn more and develop more in the thing. And although today when you hear amateur, I don't know, maybe it's just me, or maybe it's the American slant or whatever, but you hear amateur, it sounds, oh, that's amateur, oh, that's beginner, that's
Yeah, as if everything needs to be professional all the time. And if you only count professional as something you get paid doing, then I'm a professional in several fields. But I also, like with any field, and these both books talk about this, how once you start jumping into a field, you realize how much you don't know. And then there's this tendency to keep digging deeper and deeper and deeper. And when you finally get to a certain point, you're a very small percentage of the society. And those people still don't often think that they know everything. And it's, and they still think of themselves as just learning or just beginners in these territories. So sometimes it takes some outside perspective to help you with that. But yeah, I'm kind of a big fan of this jumping around as an amateur, remaining an apprentice in certain fields, right? Like having somebody who's a mentor that you're sort of following and learning from. There's different styles of learning, but we are in a world now that actually thinks that you have to be hyper specialized. And that's what both books are pushing back against is, yeah, you can earn some specialization, but when do you stop and get on with doing something interesting? Because most of the time they bring up several examples of people who are Nobel Prize winners who honestly are fulfilling 3 or 4 different passions at once. And it is actually the creativity from being broader and having like both a musical or a theater interest plus say a scientific inquiry or economics inquiry that is allowing them to bring creativity back into their field. So hyper specialists who are the the problem with that, or being an I or a T person, might actually be that you cannot bring anything new to the field because you were so indoctrinated within the language and frameworks of the field that you were in.
Yes, real quick, since that was a very good, serious point, I wanted to highlight Danielle's comment here. I like writers. I'm a pie guy voice. Do you remember that one?
Pie guy.
Oh, there you go. Perfect. No, but that, and I found the books interesting, and again, I would classify myself very much as kind of like our episodes on Thursday and Friday. Just a whole bunch of M's.
You just Ming for days.
It's like a mix between an M and a flat line, right? It's like, yeah, and that's
like
what it feels like
rumble
too.
Strips on the highway.
Yeah, or in motocross, you just like as you're taking the dirt bike across all of the bumps,
Yeah, this is a fun way to think about Reed.
Yeah, good. Yeah, anytime you think about me, just yeah, that's what it's like hanging out with me.
Yeah. So don't go on a road trip with
welcome
this guy.
to the show. What the hell is water? Where you can get the combination of and
Rumbles and flatlines.
Rumbles and flatlines. That's
Yeah.
what we're all about here. But yeah, there's a lot in those books and the discussions that I'd love to talk about more. And actually, you mentioned the mix between arts and technology and things like that. And one of the really fascinating things was some of the stories they were giving in these books where, especially in range, where it's like, hey, we have this extremely technical problem in biophysics, chemistry, nanotechnology, and we have all the best biophysics, nanotechnology people in the room, but they can't solve this problem.
What are we gonna
So what do
do?
they do? So they release it to the public, and then the school teacher from Idaho remembers when she was raising potatoes that if you do the skin a certain way, it changes this, and now we have carbon nanotubes.
Yeah, I know, it really is. It's like I was reading something about graphene the other day, and some guy was just like, all these guys were like, how do we make the thinnest sheet of graphene ever? And this guy's like, well, why don't we just put some tape on it and pull the tape off, and it'll have a super thin sheet? And everyone's like, it's too simple, but it's now how they do it. And it's oftentimes these really like simple, sort of almost dumb solutions that are coming out of nowhere, but you're in such a technical field that you can no longer think that way.
Right, and it's another phrase that comes to mind is, if all you have is a hammer, you're always looking for a nail. Another example they gave was, hey, if you go to a heart hospital or something, I'm messing up the example, I'll just say that right now. If you go to a heart hospital and you got a blockage, 90% of the time they're going to give you a stent because they're just so used to seeing, hey, clogged thing, let's put in a stent. When in reality, it's like all the other treatments were better, but because they'd been so trained in putting in the stents, that's what they automatically wanted to put in. And so the book goes through a bunch of these examples where people who are so specialized almost have these blinders as to these other ways they could think, these other ideas, and also got into a little bit about culture and how that helps drive certain things, talking about NASA and some of the big disasters that happened there and the good and bad things about their cultures. And then even I already had one of the people from the book club reach out and say that they'd be interested in talking, and they actually have a mix in dance, which is the arts, and technology. And I was like, oh, that sounds like an interesting thing that would be right up this lane. So again, we're just scratching the surface on this, but we wanted to share a little bit about it with you guys, and this is something we'll be talking about over the coming weeks, and we're going to bring on some people from this book club, and heck, maybe even some of you guys, if you have some things that you're interested in, some questions you have around this thing, please write them in. You can click the contact us form on our website, helpfulforlife.com, or you can comment on whatever platform you're watching right now. And so we're going to talk more about this, and tentatively the name for this segment is going to be So Good They Can't Ignore Your Range, because the reality is, like with most things, it's not all of this, all of that. It's some mixture of the both. And that was kind of my takeaway from both these books, is you need to have range, you need to be able to pivot, you need to be able to try new things, but then you also can benefit from going at least a little bit deep into certain topics.
Yeah, I think both books seem, you can find what you would consider contradictory points in them, but there is a podcast out there with both authors talking about how they kind of agree with each other. And part of what you see is that these are people who are just questioning things, and they're going through and they're digging around and questioning, and I feel like you can always learn something from that. And also the way they package their books, the structure of them is really nice. It's really tidy. And if you're into writing at all, then you can learn something just about structuring through that. So yeah, I like this idea of maybe every day or two we bring up an example from the book and just sort of talk through it and sort of show people some things or showcase what's going on in the book and what we sort of align with. But yeah, there's some great points in that. The Rome Reading Book Club really brings out a lot of content that wasn't there previously, even teaching us like a secondary way to read, which is just kind of going through and summarizing chapters with just like one sentence.
Yes, and we do need to do a little bit more on the first book we read, which was How to Read a Book. I don't think it necessarily needs multiple weeks of discussion.
No, yeah.
You know, especially because that one might not be quite as interested for the broader audience. But I do think we should let's talk about some of that here in a second. But before then, let's take a quick second to give people 30 seconds to kind of reflect. And hey, maybe if you haven't had 30 seconds to yourself where you have just been able to think about whatever or think about nothing or whatnot. Anything suggestions you have for people to do with a little bit of 30-second break?
Yeah, if you've just got 30 seconds, take some deep breaths. Feel it in your chest. Feel your body while you're breathing.
And I want to point out, like, when I first heard that type of thing, I rolled my eyes so hard they almost got stuck. I'm like, really? Breathing? Oh my gosh. But breathing is actually something that's extremely important, and it's a very good tool to fix and help with a lot of problems, including stress, mental health issues, anxiety, depression, all those types of things. And it's funny because it's such a basic thing that we're doing all the time without thinking about it. But just by flipping it on its head and taking some time and thinking about it and slowing down and really emphasizing it and taking really slow breaths, maybe going in through the nose and out through the mouth and doing it over a few seconds, it changes your body physically, and it can also change your mental state as well.
Yeah, it's a great practice if you only have a little bit of time. But yeah, let's take 30 seconds and do a little breathing.
And welcome back.
Welcome back, everyone. Feel so relaxed.
Welcome back to What the Hell is Water. Today is November 15th, 2021, at least while we're recording this.
Yes. If you're watching it later, just mentally edit that out.
Yes, just
Yeah, because
Sound
we're going to
effects
be
brought to you
robots in
by-
the future. Yeah.
oh man.
But like Japanese robots. Have I talked about the washing machines in Japan? Like, I know we
No.
have cute little sounds that come out of our washing machines, but like every device there has a really chirpy, upbeat tune that comes out of it. Your rice maker, your toilet, everything makes a nice, cute sound for you.
Yes, I believe it 100% because one of the people on YouTube I watch for cooking content, his name's Joshua Weissman, or Weissman, if you want to be
Weissman.
German about it. And he every time he puts the rice cooker, it plays a little song for him, and he dances like do 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 do, and he and of course he does some silly editing to make it that much more fun. And it's like, why not? Why not?
Yeah. The opportunity to dance every 15 minutes in Japan.
Yeah, it's like, okay, which would you rather have?
But please wipe when you get off the toilet
Right.
before you start dancing.
Well, if you're in Japan, then don't you have a bidet
You have
doing
the little,
that for you?
yeah, they shoot water. Up
You have
your
the little.
butt. Is that?
Actually, I think that's a good point. I mean, we actually wanted to go back into history. When Ryder was in Japan, he actually came up with the name of the show, What the Hell is Water, when he first sat on the toilet and his, whoa!
What the hell?
It is water. Oh, so speaking of, I don't know, sexual body parts, let's transition into our next segment, which is a new
Okay.
segment which we teased on Thursday, but it's called Tits.
We teased that?
Did we?
Yeah,
Maybe?
No, I think we did.
Okay, good.
Yeah. Tits. Great name. Great title. Where did
Yes.
that come from? I've never heard this word before.
It's actually, personally, I always think in acronyms. And so the acronym is This is Technology Stuff. Boop, boop, doop, doop, boop, bing, bing. So welcome to This is Technology Stuff. This is where we talk about technology things. We figured that, hey, between an electrical engineer and writer,
Whatever the heck I am.
we can explain technological things. And so we actually had a comment come in the other day. So I'm going to pull that up. And we're going to answer a technology question. So take this as your advice. Like, hey, if I have a technology question, instead of Googling it, I'm going to do something crazy and ask somebody. So ask us your technology question. You can include it in the comments on whatever platform you're on, or go to the contact form on our website, helpfulforlife.com, and let us know what your technology question is. I imagine now is a pretty good time, especially with Christmas coming up, Black Friday coming up. Guess what? It's 2021. Whether or not you want to, you got to deal with some sort of technology. So whether it's one of them fancy iPad things or one of them less fancy iPhone things, I guess it's kind of more fancy, just smaller, but something about tech stuff.
Yeah, and there's so many options out there. And do you want an OLED TV or an LED, or which versions do you want? And each brand has their own version of different things, and they can all be tested differently. And so when you start jumping into those rabbit holes, it can get daunting. I know about a year and a half ago, we bought a new television. I must have spent weeks just trying to figure out what the heck each television company was talking about.
Right.
Because they just throw out these words, and you're like, that's not a real word. And then you start looking it up, and it's some patent exclusive thing for the way they control the lighting on your television screen, or reduce flicker or movement or something. And I'm just like, I don't know what any of this means.
Yeah, we were talking a little bit of crap about how in the automobile world, how bad they are with their model names, but the only thing worse than that is probably technology stuff. And also, one of my most qualifying qualifications is I used to work at Best Buy. So I used
That's
to sell
even better than Boeing.
Yeah, better than Boeing. I like that. I'm going to tweet them now and say, hey, look what I did. But yeah, I used to sell computers, and it was a cool experience. As retail jobs go, I mean, I think few people will tell you retail jobs are the best ones in the world, given the time and the conditions, and you're on your feet all the time, all that kind of stuff. Some people love it, but a lot of people are just like, it was good. I decided to get out of retail. It's kind of like AA almost.
Well, what's funny about it too is it doesn't always have to be that way. I worked a little bit of retail as well, and I found it baffling. But that's just me personally. I think Reed and I might be the kind of guys who would question anything.
Yes.
You'd give us an ice cream sandwich, and we're going to take it apart.
Yes, we would, and we would question every component of it, and then we would make a better one.
Yeah, really quickly before it melted.
Yes, for sure. All right, so welcome to Tits. This is technology stuff. And in case you're wondering, what does that have to do with tits? Nothing but sex sells, ladies and gentlemen, and we get your attention much more when we say the word tits than when we say this is technology stuff. Which one are you more likely to click on? Let's be real.
A little bait and switch there, folks. You thought we were actually going to talk about some, anatomical parts. But nope.
Exactly.
We're going to talk about technological parts.
All right, so here we have a message here. It says, I'm having trouble getting my Wi-Fi to work in my art studio. It's close to my heart. My heart. That's not actually what they wrote, but I think it's true too. It's close to my house, but it's still spotty. Do you have any suggestions? By the way, I love the podcast. Red heart emoji.
Yes.
Oh, well, let's just spend 5 minutes talking about how she said, I love the podcast, and less about answering the question. What do you say?
No, this is all I need in the world is a little bit of validation. Just a red heart emoji once every other day. Keeps the doctor
it used
away.
to be that gold star sticker that I'd get on my papers when I got back before they went on the fridge. But now a red heart's really what gets me in the feels. And, I also wanted to point out, it didn't take not even 24 hours before we had another one of our viewers actually give a suggestion to the answer. I was wow, you guys are being very helpful. And Carolyn said, try an Orbi mesh system. And so then the question becomes, well, what is a mesh system? And
wait, what?
Yeah.
So if anyone knows anything about some of this stuff, it seems like there's multiple kinds of systems out there now. There's your typical home internet, but what makes a mesh different?
That's a great question. I'm so glad you asked. If only there was someone who knew about this kind of stuff.
Especially somebody on this show.
Oh my goodness. Oh, screen change. Here we are.
What?
Welcome to the land
Does
of
the screen know
learning.
about mesh networks?
I think the screen does know. It is inside our heads. It is telling us what to do. So, the first thing we want to talk about is Wi-Fi. So, in case that wasn't clear, the problem is they have a building that's just their house, and then they have some building in the backyard or whatever, and they're trying to get internet to it, and it's kind of far away. And if it's behind their house and things like that, then there's stuff blocking the signal. So first, I wanted to really briefly talk about, as an electrical engineer who did stuff in what's called RF, which stands for radio frequency. I think I should explain a little bit about how wireless works, because it's all around you, whether or not you care or not. You're using it every day. So one of the things about wireless is basically it allows you to beam information from one thing to another. And the most obvious example of this is probably cell phones. And so when you have a cell phone, you know, you got your little phone here. They used to have buttons down here. Now it's a little harder to make them obvious what you did. But and for those who are audio only, I'm using some lovely drawing skills here to display my points.
Masterful drawing.
Yeah,
There's
so
an upside down candle on the screen right now.
Exactly. So you can come see for yourself on YouTube is the best way. But you could also see it on Twitter, Twitch, or Facebook. But YouTube will be the easiest and will last the longest. So I would recommend going there. But you have your cell phone. And then you have what, you know, your radio tower, which is, you know, somewhere off in the distance, which I'm, you know, doing a wonderful job drawing here. For those who aren't seeing, just picture the loveliness.
It's lovely.
That's the reactions we need. That's the reactions we need.
Just more M's.
Yes.
Because drawing is one of these M legs that you're getting better and better at.
Yes. Drawing starts with pensive thinking. So basically what's happening is you're sending wireless energy from one thing to another. And it's weird to think about, but it's actually on what's called the electromagnetic spectrum. And so if you look at this long bar over here, you will see this is what I'm using to represent the electromagnetic spectrum. And then within this smaller, narrower part, that's what's called visible light. So Roy G. Biv, a rainbow, you know, red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet. So as we're looking around, we're using our eyes. We are seeing light energy that is bouncing around. Our body just happens to be tuned to see this specific part of it. Well, all electronics are doing is they're tuning to a different part of this frequency, a different wavelength, a different part of the spectrum to listen, and just like we're looking, if that makes sense. And so you do that using something called an antenna. And so your antenna is what sends and receives these signals. And so it basically is blasting out this energy in a wireless way, in a way you can't see unless you have some specialized tool that's meant to receive these signals. What are your thoughts so far? Just following or lost?
Yeah, no, sounds great. It sounds like magic.
It is basically like magic.
It's invisible magic surrounding us and probably polluting us, which is why we wear tinfoil hats out in New Mexico. You know, it's yeah, because you need to block all this stuff from the government controlling your brain with these energy waves. So yeah, that's where my brain went immediately.
Throw in some chemtrails too while you're at it. And Bush did 9/11. Just keep piling them on.
Oh, well, I can, and there are lizards that are shape-shifting that actually run the government.
Yeah, and then what about the aliens? Surely they're involved in some way.
Yeah, actually, you know, that's the funny thing about it is the aliens are us.
Oh my god. So wireless is basically like a different part of the light that you're looking at. And so one nice thing about that is it lends itself very well for you to understand how it works, because you have at least some kind of cursory understanding of how light works. So let's just use a very basic example here, which is, can you tell what this is, Ryder?
It looks like, I was going to say one thing, but I'll say a flashlight.
Hey, a flashlight.
Oh, man.
It's a very shoddily drawn flashlight, but it was good enough to get you to figure it out.
At first I thought funnel, and then I thought, but there's a dot on the funnel. Oh, that's a switch.
Genius.
Yeah. Of course, in my day, once again, we would go backward to that candle. We just turn the candle the right side up. And
Yes, when we played football with our
where the candles,
on our helmets, so we could all see.
It was just hot wax splatters everywhere, boys and girls.
Oh, that would be so fun to see. So, flashlight. So when you have a flashlight, you have a brightness, right? And then you also have kind of a beam, right? And with certain kinds of flashlights, you will get a much stronger concentration of light towards the middle. And some of them even have a ring you can twist to say, hey, I want it to be more focused or want it to be more diffuse. But as you're shining a light, if you try and shine a light through a wall, what does it do?
Nothing. It doesn't go through the wall.
It doesn't go through the wall. So that's the thing. Visible light is not going to go through most solid surfaces, although it does go through some. For example, glass, which is actually a great analogy for wireless internet. The reason you're able to get cell phone signal inside of buildings is because it's just going through windows. It's really that simple. It's going through windows. And guess what? That symbol, just like light or signal, is bouncing all around. It's bouncing off the walls, bouncing off the floors, bouncing off your face, bouncing off your nose, bouncing off your ears. I don't know why I'm getting so specific here.
Yeah.
Because the aluminum foil actually traps it all inside. It makes it bounce around that
even
much
faster.
more. Yeah, that'd be great. Like all the people who wear tinfoil hats have the worst
They're like 3
issues.
times crazier.
Yeah. But yeah, so the light is coming in the form of cell phone signal, and it's bouncing all around. And there are some times where it doesn't get very good signal, and some of that may be based on where you are. So for example, where I live, if you're looking at just like a side view of this is elevation, so let's say this is 200 feet up. Well, I live kind of in a basin, it's not this drastic, but basically what happens is there's these cell phone towers over here off the side, and then they're sending the signal, and it's having a hard time getting down into the hole, basically. And so that can lead to things, the signal not being as good. But if we're talking about the context of a building, all of the walls are going to form a barrier, especially in the case of a shed, they're probably metal walls. And that's going to just act as what's called a Faraday cage, which is a fancy way of saying, kind of like your aluminum tinfoil hat, when you completely encase something in metal, no signal is going to get in or out because it's automatically grounded, or at least keeps all on the outside. And so when you're in the building, maybe you don't have enough windows, maybe the signal's not good enough to start with. Sometimes people will put what's called repeaters, and they'll put that in the house to propagate that signal.
So the signal goes out, it hits a repeater, the repeater takes that signal and just re-amplifies it?
Right. So this is a great transition into the original question, which is what is a mesh router, right? And how do you get your signal somewhere else that you want it if it's not nearby? So this brings us back to Wi-Fi. So I use cell phones because cell phones are everywhere, but Wi-Fi is essentially the same kind of thing, except instead of a radio tower, you have a box in your house. And there are a couple of boxes, and sometimes they're combined into one, but there's what's called the modem, and there's what's called the router. And the modem is actually 2 words, I believe, or maybe I'm messing that part up, but mod stands for modulate, because basically what the fancy way of saying it is there's a signal, which looks kind of like this, unlike writer's heart, which is like, as we talked about earlier with the flat line. But there's a signal, and on that signal, there's data. And this is just a picture, so this isn't exactly what it looks like, but I'm just drawing some little orange lines on the black line. So there's a signal that's carrying the information, and then there's the information that's on it. And what this modem does is it modulate and demodulate. Those are the 2 parts. So that's what a modem does. It modulates and it demodulates, and that's a fancy way of saying it puts the data, the signal you want, onto the carrier. So that's modulating it, and demodulating is undoing that, because the way you send information electronically, let's just think about a classic radio signal. Oh, hey, this is Reed on Talk FM. How's it going, Ryder?
Trucker breaker 1.
Yes, yes.
Mother Ducky, come in.
There's actually a lot that's going on between there. So when I'm talking into a microphone in the radio station, it takes that signal from what's called analog, the real world, and the world of sound pressure. So I'm literally moving air in front of my mouth, and that's going into a microphone where there's a thin layer of material that's moving up and down, and that is converted into electrical signal, which is then modulated onto a carrier signal, which is then broadcasted out over the radio to, say, a car, where the car, you have an antenna, which you used to see as a little flimsy thing with the Jack in the Box logo on top of it.
Yeah.
So you used to have that antenna. Now they've gotten smaller and better and less obvious. But that antenna then goes into your car, into your radio, where it's then demodulated into the voice that you can hear.
So this is like, it's kind of like coding it or encrypting it and then de-encrypting
Yes,
it.
very very
it.
similar. Yes. The only difference is anyone can do it.
Yes, 'cause
so
it's open.
Because it's open and it's a known thing. It says, hey, at this frequency, and that's actually what radio stations are. They are frequencies. So if you're like 95.4, that's 95.4 megahertz, I believe, which is literally saying, hey, if you get an antenna and you tune to this frequency, this is the signal you're going to receive.
So, like, for instance, my Wi-Fi has these options for 5, I think it's 5 and 2.4, and those are gigahertz too. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you have your router, there's two main frequencies that you should care about: 2.4 gigahertz and 5 gigahertz. 2.4 and 5, and basically. I'll come back to that in 1 second. So the modem is taking the information from the internet, which we'll explain what the internet really is on another day. But it's taking that information, let's say from YouTube, as you're watching this video, and then it's demodulating. It's getting that signal out, and then it sends it to a router, which sometimes they're built in and then they're the same thing, but other times they're a separate box. And that router, that is what sends things to every device on your network. And when I say network, that means all of the devices are connected. They all have an address within the same neighborhood. So there's something called IP address, which is just like your mail address. It's just digital. And so whenever it comes to the router, that's what allows all of those devices to talk to each other and also talk to the internet. So when it comes to frequency-wise, there are two main frequencies you need to know about: 2.4 and 5. And you may notice that 2.4 is lower than 5.
Huh. Weird.
I know, right? And so if you were to look at what these signals look like, you would see, a squiggly line like that. Well, if you look at 5, it's actually basically twice as squiggly, because it is a higher frequency. And so that means that a frequency is a fancy way of saying how much does it go up to 1 and back down. How much does it go up and down basically in a second?
Because there's length and height,
right?
Or something like this.
Yeah. So there's what's called amplitude and frequency. So amplitude is how high the signal is, and then frequency is how often it happens, right?
Yeah.
And so when you hear gigahertz, that's 10 to the 9. So 5 times 10 to the 9 times per second, this signal is going up and down.
Yeah.
So it's kind of quick like that. And you heard me say frequency and amplitude, right? Oh, well, those happen to be the type of modulation used for radio. So FM is frequency modulation and AM is amplitude modulation. And those are the two types of ways that basically radio signals are sent when it comes to at least American terrestrial radio stations. Yeah. And that's basically, you have your signal, and so the frequency modulation, I might mess this up, so we'll have to double check afterwards and make sure to let you guys know in the comments if I do mess anything up here. But frequency modulation, you actually are going to change the frequency of the signal. Oh, that was a bad drawing. You're going to change the frequency of the signal in order to send messages. And so, for example, in this section here, you can see it's a little denser, whereas here it's a little more spread out, and here it's a little denser. So that could be one way you're adding information. One of these could be a 1, and one of these could be a 0, basically. So that would be 1, 0, 1, for example. So they're changing the frequency to get the information, which is in the form of 1s and 0s here. The other way is amplitude modulation. So if you had a signal like this versus this, and you can see how the waves are taller in certain sections. So here, for example, maybe that would be a 1, and since it's not as tall there, that would be a 0. And so that is frequency modulation versus amplitude modulation, FM versus AM. Following that roughly?
Oh, yeah. No, this is great. Yeah.
Okay, so 2.4, 5 when it comes to the Wi-Fi.
When we're back on Wi-Fi again at your house, there's usually a couple options. Sometimes people don't even care about them, doesn't even really register. Why would we need to know about the difference in frequencies for your Wi-Fi?
Right. So that comes down to the light analogy. So 2.4, since it is a lower frequency, it's going to be able to punch through things better. The longer the wavelength is, the lower the frequency. Those are saying two ways of saying the same thing. The better it travels. So coming back to radio, if you look at FM, it actually has a much higher frequency than AM does. And if you know anything about AM, I'd say most people probably born in the last 15 years don't, just because it's not used as much anymore. But before that, AM, you can receive that signal way out in the boonies, and it may not sound as good, but you can get it really far, because when it comes to all these, the mountains and the divots and all that kind of stuff, the longer waves do a better job of traveling past that thing. So the same thing applies when it comes to 2.4 versus 5 and your Wi-Fi. So that 2.4 is able to get further, and it's not blocked as walls as easily. Okay. However, 5, since it has that higher frequency, it's able to fit a bunch more data on that area.
Got it.
And so basically, if you have a good enough signal from the 5, you want to be using it because it's going to give you a faster connection. And so a lot of times in routers, you can actually enable it to where it could be smart and it automatically chooses for you, or it can have 2 separate networks where it says one's at 2.4 and one's at 5. That's the approach I generally like to take. And here's legitimately my thought process. Okay, if it's like a flashlight and my router's in my closet in the middle of my house, okay, the further away I am from that, the dimmer that light's going to be. The more walls that are in the way, the dimmer that light's going to be. If I'm all the way up, say in my parents' house, for example, going upstairs through a floor, through multiple walls, past the door into the toilet room where I'm spending a good amount of time on the internet.
Of course, yeah.
That's when I'm like, okay, maybe I should be on 2.4 here because I'm going to get probably a better signal. And if I use 5, maybe it would be kind of a spotty connection. It wouldn't actually be that good. So if you're trying to beam, for example, wireless from your house out somewhere else, that's where 2.4 might be more useful. And these are all settings you can configure within your router, which if y'all want to know specifics on that, definitely write in and we could help out on that as well. And some of that we may do on the morning show or the What the Hell is Water. Some we might do somewhere else because we recognize not everyone wants to get into the weeds on this, right?
Yeah.
So then it comes to the router, right? So you have, maybe you can't get the signal there with your 2.4, right? So then what are your options, right? So one option is what's called a range extender. And so a range extender, so you have your main router in your house. Well, you put another box wherever you want to extend it to, and then this information is then sent to this box. That information is received, and then it's rebroadcasted. And so they just basically take that signal, and then they boost it. So they add more power behind it so it can go further. So a range extender is essentially dumb. It just takes in the signal, says, hey, here's what I heard, and it yells it again. Another option is using something that's called mesh. And mesh is basically where you have multiple boxes, and a common number is 3. So you have these 3 routers, and they're all talking with each other the entire time, and they all can talk to the devices. So you have, your cell phones or whatever, your computers, all that kind of stuff. You have it, and you're on these things, and at any one time, your device could be talking to any one of those 3 boxes. And so the benefit of that is, hey, I'm upstairs on the toilet. Oh, it talks to the one that's closer to me, and then it actually beams that signal back to the main router, which is connected to the modem. And so what you have is, whenever you're setting this up in your office or your closet or whatever, you will connect your router to that modem. And so you'll have one that's kind of like the main core unit. That's your connection to the internet. And then these other units, they form a mesh network because basically around them is like an area of coverage. So if we're representing each of them as this dot, you have these circles of signal that go around them. And there are some areas where it's going to overlap. And the way the mesh system works is it's intelligently talking to all of these boxes all of the time.
So it basically can hand you off as you're moving through. And I would assume that the benefit of this has something to do with this maybe you can always operate on 5G instead of having to go down to 2.4.
Yeah, so that I would say depends on, your situation, where you live, how many devices are on your network, because the more devices you have on your network, the more taxing it will be on whatever system you're on. So that's one of the big benefits of the mesh network is it does well with more devices because it can more intelligently handle them. And you may not think about it, but if you have a bad signal with someone, it's going to take you a longer time to have that conversation. Think about a phone call you had with someone where it's kind of spotty. You don't really understand each other. You got to clarify that kind of stuff. The same kind of analogy goes with internet. So the faster you're able to fix someone's problem, give them what they need, the better it is for the health of the overall network. And so that's the benefit of the mesh is you can have so many devices and they'll just intelligently talk to the one that's needed. And in some cases, as I mentioned, they will even intelligently switch which network is talking to you and say, hey, we're trying to send you this 5 gigahertz. We realize that you're dropping 30% of it. We're going to switch over to the 2.4 now. Okay. So that's another example of one of the things that not just routers do, but mesh routers as well. And so, we're coming up on the end of our time here, but this hopefully gives a little bit of explanation as to what a router is, how the wireless data communications work, and what mesh is. And so some of the popular brands for mesh networks, there's one called Netgear is the company, and the brand is Orbi, O-R-B-I. That's one that I actually have installed in my parents' house and have had pretty good success with. There's another one called Eero, E-E-R-O, and they are also a pretty good mesh networking solution. And Eero has a little bit more user-friendly, and they have an app where you can look at stuff and manipulate stuff. I think they are a little bit more user-friendly and easier to pick up as a non-technical user than the Netgear Orbi. At least it was when I last compared, which was a while ago. So who knows how things have changed. But those are a couple of the main brands. And another one is Google.
Google Nest.
Yeah, Google. Yeah, do they call it?
It's Google Nest something.
Yeah, you just Google mesh router, it'll come up. But the bottom line with all of these is if you live in, say, an apartment complex and you are a 1-bedroom apartment, you don't really need a mesh network. This is more for people who have lots of space, or they have, say, for example, a house that was built a certain way, it's got metal in the walls or something like that, and you're just not able to get signals to the places you need. So the larger the space you're in, the more you need. Or in the case of the commenter here, if you had a space outside of your house, this is another chance where that mesh router might be a good choice. And the cool thing about the mesh router is you can upgrade as you go. So you start out with, say, maybe even just 2 units because you're like, I don't really, but it would be nice. Then you can add on a 3rd in the future. And if you wanted to add a 4th or 5th or whatever, you could do that as well. So that's one nice thing about the mesh thing is that it gives you that ability to expand. One other option I want to mention is something called power line. And basically a power line adapter, it allows you to, you've got your good old fashioned plug here, which doesn't he just look so happy?
Yeah, it's like a little emoji.
Yeah.
Yeah. If
So
you've
you have
ever
your plug.
thought about plugs as faces, every time you put something into them, then it's, it changes the dynamic experience.
Right.
It's like, shut up.
So you have a plug, which when I say plug, I just mean an electrical outlet, like the same thing you plug your lights into, you charge your phone in, all that kind of stuff. You hook that up to this box, which has a certain port on it for you to plug in your Ethernet cable, which is a fancy way of saying the cable that runs your internet. And for those who have been around long enough to know about phone lines, it's basically like a phone line, but thicker. And so you plug in your Ethernet into that, and then you would plug that into your router box. And then somewhere else in your house, anywhere else that's connected to your electricity, you find another plug. And then you just connect from that plug to another box. And then that gives you internet wherever that is. So, for example, in your house, like if you had the thing behind your house, like with your shed or whatever you want to call it, your man cave.
Yes.
This is an option you could do where you have the plug that you do inside the house, and you put it right next to your router, and then out in the shop you put another plug, and then the internet actually gets modulated and put on that same signal, that same wire that's carrying your house internet. And then when it gets to the other box, it's demodulated and it's put into a form that you could then plug straight into a computer. You could plug into another router.
So this uses your electrical lines to carry the internet signal.
Exactly.
For you. So if my shop or shed or man cave is on the same electrical system as my house, then it should carry that to that outlying building. Now, if they were probably on separate electrical systems entirely, it may not work for you.
Right.
Or I'm sure there's distance requirements on all this stuff, and we could get geeky about it. But yeah, I think there's a lot of little options out there. There's also even options now for things like lasers, where you basically directly beam from one building to the next building, a very tight beam signal to a different receiver, and this acts a little bit more like a satellite or something, you know.
Right. Yeah. And that, for all the options I've been talking about, that's when I would say if you're within, say, 100 feet from the house and you had this back building, then you don't really need to go with some of these solutions. But some of those solutions become more important as that distance gets bigger. So say you've got a farm and then you've got a barn that's like 100 yards away.
Yeah.
That would be the perfect type of thing to have. Basically, you would put what's called a very directional antenna on your roof, or a laser, and you basically are modulating that signal in different ways, going through this other equipment, which has no idea what that information actually says, and then it sends it either through laser, which, guess what, laser is another form of the light spectrum, or you send it over just a radio wave or whatnot to an antenna that then demodulates and puts it into your router. So same kind of thing. These are all different ways of moving data around.
Yeah, I find the one with the power cords and the power line, the power, whatever you call it, to be
power
just,
line.
Yeah, that just blew my mind the first time I heard about it. I was like, what? Then why are we using all these cables if it's already like, if all you have to do is just plug things in? But still, I find it to be kind of cool. And I know a guy that works at a gallery that is all concrete. So the Wi-Fi signals do not move very well throughout the building. But of course, you have visitors come in, and more artists are using multimedia, and it's Wi-Fi dependent, it's power dependent. It's just basically hard to get anything done now without internet access everywhere all the time. So he started actually using power lines within that building so that they can move signal around better.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And to be frank, I've not looked at power line in a while. I don't know how that technology has changed or morphed or whatnot over the years, but it's been around for probably at least 15, if not 20 plus years. So that one's been around for a while, and it does work. I'm not familiar with all the downsides of it, but one big upside of the power line is it's going to be a little less expensive than, for example, buying a whole new mesh system, or maybe even buying an extender. So if I would definitely recommend it if you have that very clear application where it's like, I just need to go one area over, or say, hey, my son's upstairs and he wants to have hardwired internet, but he doesn't get very good Wi-Fi up there or whatnot, then that's a good option there. But yeah, so it's definitely one worth looking at. And kind of like we were talking about with the other day when we were talking about how we shop, don't be afraid to buy these things and try them out and see. And maybe some of them work better for you based on your situation and some of them don't. And you can research till the cows come home, but until you actually plug the thing in and install it, you're not really going to know until it's performing in the space.
Yeah, good points. Yeah.
Well, cool. Well, hopefully this has been somewhat interesting for at least two of you. We've got Danielle, who brought us back and grounded us in, and she said, everything is energy, man.
Oh, man. Yeah.
But yeah, I when we start talking about it, it's like, all right, I don't know how much in the weeds we're going to get, but sometimes you go into the weeds to explain. And the reality is with all this stuff is it's not horribly complicated. It just needs some definition and understanding. And like, if you are listening and you're just like, oh my gosh, I don't get any of that, blah, blah, well, just take a second and go back and watch and listen and just try and get through it and see if you can follow it. And if not, let us know what part you got hung up on. Let us know where you're confused. And if nothing else, maybe you could use this to talk to someone, your friend or family, like, hey, did you know how wireless works? I do.
I know. Next time you're having a fancy dinner party.
Yes. Yes. Politics and money and things like that.
Mesh networks.
Yes. What do you think about mesh networks?
Yes. Everyone's going to go, they're going to pretend like they understand what you're talking about, but they don't.
Yes. And, so this is a perfect example to tie back to what we were talking about earlier today. So we started off, we were talking a little bit about the book's range and So Good They Can't Ignore You. So we kind of gave a little bit of a teaser, some of the things that we took away from that, and that's going to be something we touch on multiple times in the coming weeks, possibly bringing in some guests from our book club to talk about that. And then we took a quick mindfulness break for everyone to take a time to breathe and just relax. And then we discussed our first inaugural tits. This is technology stuff, and we talked about what is wireless, when it comes to the internet, when it comes to your cell phone, when it comes to Wi-Fi, how does it work? and we told you how, hey, it's just like light, just like a flashlight. So when you're wondering why am I not getting signal, just like if you go on an elevator, this is a great one. If you go on an elevator with a cell phone, you are effectively in a Faraday cage. The only way signal is coming through happens to be through some ceiling tiles or something like that. So don't be surprised when you go into an elevator and your phone stops working. And next time you're in the elevator and someone does that, be like, that's the Faraday cage effect. I'm sorry to tell you.
Oops.
Yeah. Maybe if you had switched to 2.4, it might have lasted a little longer.
Right. Well, no, I should also take just a second to say that my wife has an art show up in Houston right now that is a Faraday cage.
Oh.
So, yeah, we built a Faraday cage down there. And what's been fascinating is just over the last couple of years, it is harder and harder to get a Faraday cage to actually work because there have been so many changes in the way that technology is getting better and better. Not only is your phone better picking up the tiniest signal, but also they're changing signal frequencies to make it easier and easier for you to access it. So it's kind of a fascinating time period to even try to build something like a Faraday cage when the entire world is working against you.
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the cool things that happens to me is that I know some of these things, and then I know people whose job it is to make them more robust, so we'll get into more of this later, I'm sure, because I think it's fun, and hopefully at least 5 people out there do, but things like, okay, when you're working from a satellite, which is what my job was for the 5 years or so, a satellite is doing exactly this. It's basically a cell phone tower in the sky. It's trying to talk to things on the ground. Maybe it's talking to other satellites. And oh, by the way, it's got to go through things like rain. It's got to go. It's got to keep in mind where it is in relation to the Earth, because that could be changing. It's got to keep in mind all these various things. And by the end of the day, a great example is GPS. GPS is probably it's so faint of a signal, but they've done such a good job engineering it that you're able to get a GPS signal almost anywhere now and tell your location. Now, like with certain kinds of GPS, it's like so precise. Like I want to say within inches, maybe if not at least within a couple meters. But that's based on these things that are floating, 26,000 miles. No, I don't know the number. I'm going to mess that one up. Way up in the sky. And they're just beaming down this wireless signal, and you're able to get it on your little tiny box on your phone. And so it's pretty cool when you start to explain what's going on. It's really easy to be like, why isn't my signal working? And it's like, well, do you know all the things that are happening to make that happen?
Right.
So so that's just in tune with our show, What the Hell is Water? There's stuff going on around you all the time. And our job here is to help explain how some of those things work, how you can use them to your advantage, and how you can take that knowledge that you have to better go through the world. So maybe after today, as you're going to your new friend's house or at your own house, maybe you'll switch over to the 5 gigahertz network when you're out in the living room and you're trying to get faster connection. And maybe if you're going to that far distant bathroom, you're like, 2.4 is where it's at. And maybe if you're at your grandma's house and you're like, Grandma, your internet really sucks, and there's 35 people who come here every Christmas, and it's really annoying because I'm trying to Snapstagram over here.
Yeah, because that's what tends to happen. We all sit on the couches, and then we all pull our phones open.
Exactly.
And when you have 35 people all on their phones, you might need some help with that internet.
Right, and not that is the behavior we want to encourage.
No,
but there's times where you get a phone call in a house, you want to be able to take it, and so that might be a time where a mesh network might be useful for you. So please let us know any questions you guys have in the comments below, or write in on our website, helpfulforlife.com, and hit the contact us form in the top right. And real quick, I wanted to make sure to point out, on Friday we forgot to do our recap. So on Friday we had Silpa and Tanya of Mindful Mompreneur Moments. And before we had them on, we talked a lot about other M topics. So Thursday, we started talking about 4 M's. And then after that, on Friday, it was like, there's a bunch more M's we could do. So we just kept going. And then we wrapped up that episode with the Mindful Mompreneur Moments. So that was a great conversation we had this past Friday, 3 days ago. So check that out if you haven't. Challenge. What about a challenge for today?
Ooh, man, I was going to go with the Wi-Fi thing, but I think I'm a little more interested in the sort of range and so good they can't ignore you, is maybe figure out what kind of person you are. Like if you have things that you have done deep dives on and you have areas of competency that maybe aren't normal, jot those down. Journal that, keep a list of these things that you're really good at. because as we continue to talk about these books, we're going to keep referring back to those moments. And there's ways to stitch those together to make something amazing happen.
Yes, I think that's a great challenge. And I will say, if you figure out which letter you are, even if it's not right, just which one does your gut say, put that in the comments below. And we'll ask you guys about that again in the future, because I'm curious to see what people think. Do we have a bunch of M's? Do we have a bunch of I's? Do we have a bunch of, pies?
Pies.
Okay, why don't we close with that pie voice?
I don't know if I can do it again.
I've got faith in you.
Hey, guys.
Tell everyone to have a great day, Ryder.
Have a great day, everybody.
Bye now.